1. Amazing mental clarity. Before he discovered the effects of semen retention, his mind felt like a browser with 30 tabs open and none of them loading properly. He would wake up with a feeling of mental fatigue, as if he had spent the night trying to solve an endless puzzle. His ideas came in bits and pieces, his thoughts were confused, and any task that required focus turned into an emotional marathon. Even remembering where he left his keys was a daily challenge. It was like living in a constant fog, with no clarity or direction. After a few weeks of semen retention, something started to change. His mind felt like a turbulent lake that gradually became calm and crystal clear. Ideas flowed more easily, his concentration increased, and that quick thinking, which previously seemed like a privilege of geniuses, was now part of his routine. He realized that he could remember dates, appointments, and even details of old conversations without making any effort. His productivity at work doubled, and that feeling of being clear-headed became his new reality. He began adopting habits that further enhanced this mental clarity. This included daily reading, with books such as The Power of Habit and Thinking, Fast and Slow, which further stimulated focus and discipline. He reduced his social media consumption, started taking notes in a notebook to organize his ideas, and, most importantly, created the habit of reviewing his goals every morning. His brain, which had previously been a battlefield, became a command center. Even in everyday conversations, the difference was clear. Before, he would get lost in his own words, forgetting what he wanted to say in the middle of a sentence. Now, he could build solid arguments, speak confidently, and even improvise when necessary. His friends started to notice the change. "Man, what are you doing? You've been more active lately." And he smiled inside, knowing that the secret was right there, in semen retention. The most curious thing is that, along with mental clarity, a new wave of physical energy began to appear, as if the body was preparing for a new level of performance. But that is a topic for the next topic. 2. Inexhaustible physical energy. He used to be that guy who was always tired. You know, the kind of guy who wakes up wanting to go back to bed? Well, that's right. After a few hours of work or study, his body would already show signs of exhaustion. That energy to work out, go for a walk, or even play with his nephews simply didn't exist. It was a cycle of fatigue that seemed to have no end. But from the moment he started practicing semen retention, the scenario began to change in an almost unbelievable way. The first signs were subtle. He noticed that, at the end of the day, he still had energy left to do things that had previously seemed impossible. Climbing stairs without getting out of breath, doing more repetitions at the gym, walking long distances without feeling exhausted. Everything started to become easier. His body felt lighter and, at the same time, stronger. His energy came not only in quantity, but in quality. It was an energy that lasted all day. He decided to test his limits. He started waking up earlier to run in the park before work. He included strength training, such as weight training and calisthenics, and even tried new sports, such as swimming. With each passing week, he noticed progress. Less muscle pain, faster recovery, and a natural desire to move. Semen retention was transforming his bioenergy into a true high-octane fuel. Even in his daily life, the changes were evident. Household tasks that he had previously put off out of laziness began to be done with pleasure. Cooking, cleaning the house, taking care of the plants. Everything became lighter. He was no longer the guy who would come home from work and collapse on the couch. Now, he had plenty of energy to experience the things he had previously put off until later. And the most curious thing, this energy seemed to come from within, as if it were an infinite reserve, ready to be used. And it was precisely during this phase of physical explosion that he began to notice another interesting phenomenon. Something that directly affected the way he saw himself in front of others. His self-confidence began to grow in a way he had never experienced before. 3. Absurd increase in self-confidence. Before he started practicing semen retention, he was that typical guy who walked with his head down, looked away when he passed someone, and always had a hesitant tone of voice. You know when you arrive somewhere feeling inferior? Well, that's exactly how it was. Conversations were full of, I don't know. And, sorry, just an opinion. Insecurity took over. It was as if his self-esteem had been hijacked by years of bad habits. As the weeks of semen retention passed, the transformation began to happen almost automatically. His gaze became firmer, his posture more upright, and his tone of voice gained a natural confidence that it had never had before. He no longer needed to force his presence. It simply happened. People began to listen to him more attentively. His friends began to ask, "Dude, what happened to you? You look different." And he just smiled, knowing exactly why. His self-confidence began to overflow in several areas. At work, he began to position himself better in meetings. When he had to present an idea, his voice came out strong and clear, without tremors. Even in his social life, the change was striking. When he went out with friends, he no longer sat in the corner of the table in silence. He began to strike up conversations with strangers, give his opinion without fear, and even make those jokes that he used to be afraid to make. One of the habits that helped a lot in this process was looking in the mirror every day and practicing nonverbal communication. He spent a few minutes a day adjusting his posture, practicing eye contact, and even rehearsing how to speak more assertively. A book that made a difference in this process was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Semen retention brought the energy, and he tried to polish the rest with attitude and practice. But the most incredible thing is that, along with this new self-confidence, came a capacity he never had before: emotional control. That ability to not be shaken by anything and to choose his battles intelligently. But that's a topic for the next chapter of this journey. 4. Emotional control I never had. Before semen retention, he was the kind of person who would explode for any reason. A rude comment at work, a delay in traffic, or even a simple misunderstanding with a friend were enough to throw him off balance. His emotions controlled his life as if they were the owners of an invisible remote control. Sometimes anger would come, sometimes sadness, and worst of all, always at the most inopportune moments. Emotional stability seemed like a distant dream. But it was only when he started practicing semen retention that the game began to change. He began to realize that, between stimulus and reaction, there was a space, and that in this space lived choice. External situations continued to happen, of course, but the way he reacted became much more mature and controlled. Instead of exploding, he took a deep breath. Instead of sinking into sadness, he began to look for solutions. It was as if his mind had gained an emotional break. A clear example was in traffic. Before, any aggressive honking would trigger a series of insults. Now, he would simply look, laugh internally, and move on. At work, when he received criticism, instead of shutting down or becoming defensive, he began to listen carefully, absorbing what made sense and discarding the rest. This skill began to be reflected in all of his relationships, whether with friends, family, or teammates. To help with this process, he also started practicing meditation. However, contrary to what many people think, it wasn't anything mystical or complicated. All he had to do was lie down or sit down for 5 minutes, close his eyes and focus on his breathing. This simple habit, combined with semen retention, created a powerful emotional shield. A book he read during this phase that made all the difference was Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. He recommends it to anyone who wants to gain this self-control. And the most interesting thing is that, along with this emotional balance, something even more curious began to happen. People around him began to look at him differently, especially women, as if this new energy had begun to create an invisible magnetic attraction. But that is a topic for the next topic. 5. Effortless natural attraction. Before semen retention, he was practically invisible. He could be in any social setting, party, or even at work, and no one would notice him. Especially women. It was as if he was just another person in the crowd. It didn't matter what clothes he wore or what catchphrases he tried to use. The truth is that his energy was low, dull. It was the famous present in body, but lacking in energy. But after a few weeks of semen retention, things began to change in a way that took him a while to understand. The way people around him looked at him began to change. When he entered a place, he noticed discreet glances, shy smiles, and even those quick glances that every man notices when he is paying attention. And the most incredible thing, he hadn't changed his haircut, he hadn't bought new clothes, and he wasn't trying to act like an alpha. The truth is that his body began to emit a different energy, a magnetic presence. That vibrational field that you can't see, but that everyone can feel. Women, in particular, began to approach him more, start conversations, laugh at the silliest jokes, and even give spontaneous compliments. A simple, "good morning," at the gym turned into a 10-minute conversation. He no longer needed to chase attention. It came to him, naturally. To further enhance this effect, he began to take care of his appearance in a simple but effective way. He improved his posture, started wearing clothes that flattered his body, and started taking care of his skin. Small adjustments that, combined with semen retention, made his presence even more impactful. A book he read during this phase that made a lot of sense was The Subtlety of Seduction by Robert Greene. It helped him better understand the invisible game of attraction. And the most curious thing, this new magnetism brought another unexpected benefit. He began to focus more on his own goals, leaving aside the unbridled search for external validation. After all, with so much accumulated energy, his mind began to aim at something even greater. But I'll tell you about that detail in the next topic. 6. Total focus on my goals. Before semen retention, his life was an endless series of projects started and abandoned halfway through. That initial excitement would last a few days, and soon he would find himself curled up on the couch, scrolling through his cell phone feed and putting everything off until tomorrow. Time seemed to slip through his fingers. His mind would jump from one idea to another, without consistency. Starting was easy. Finishing was the real challenge. It was like living in a cycle of eternal procrastination. But it wasn't until he started practicing semen retention that this pattern began to break down. The energy that had previously been wasted began to transform into natural discipline. He began waking up earlier, making to-do lists, and most importantly, completing everything he set out to do. The feeling of crossing items off his to-do list became a positive addiction. That focus he envied in others was now inside him, pulsing strongly. He realized that his mind had stopped seeking quick gratification. Before, a like on social media or an entertaining video was enough to distract him for hours. Now, he began to direct this accumulated energy towards long-term projects. He started an online course that he had been putting off for months, created a daily reading routine, and even went back to the gym with a serious plan. One book he devoured during this phase was The One Thing by Gary Keller, which taught him to prioritize what really matters. He also began using simple productivity techniques, such as the Pomodoro method, to stay focused in time blocks. He set clear goals, with deadlines and clearly defined steps. Semen retention worked as an internal booster, which kept his motivation high even on the hardest days. Friends who had previously called him the king of procrastination were now impressed with the results he was achieving. And it was precisely during this new cycle of focus that he noticed another transformation. Something that went far beyond productivity, physical or mental. It was as if a spiritual door began to open, bringing a deeper connection with his own essence. But I'll tell you about this discovery in the next topic. 7. Much stronger spiritual connection. Before semen retention, he was curious about spirituality, but it seemed like there was always an invisible block. Meditations were nothing more than a few minutes of boredom, self-knowledge books seemed distant, and any attempt to connect with something greater was interrupted by loose and scattered thoughts. It was as if there was no key to open the door to spirituality. And no matter how hard he tried, the connection never really happened. As soon as he started practicing semen retention, everything started to change. Little by little, he noticed that his mind became quieter during meditation. His inner answers started to come more clearly. You know that moment when you ask the universe a question and suddenly you get a strong intuition, as if someone whispered the answer in your ear? Well, that started to happen more often. What was once just theory became a real experience. He also began to have more lucid dreams, full of hidden meanings. During moments of introspection, he felt energy rising up his spine like a wave of heat. He began to study more about Kundalini, chakras, and vital energy. One of the books he read during this phase and that greatly expanded his perception was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. This helped him understand the importance of living in the present and not getting lost in excessive thoughts. In addition to spiritual practices, he developed the habit of walking in nature, with his cell phone turned off, just listening to the sound of the birds and feeling the wind on his face. Small actions like these further increased his level of inner connection. He also began practicing gratitude, writing down 3 things he was grateful for every day. This, combined with semen retention, made him feel more at peace, more centered and with a clear purpose. And it was precisely in this state of spiritual balance that he began to notice another change. Something more physical, more earthly, that he never imagined would be influenced by semen retention, the quality of his sleep. But that is a story for the next topic. 8. Improved sleep quality. Before semen retention, he was the kind of guy who woke up more tired than he went to bed. His nights were filled with random awakenings, with his mind racing and his body restless. He had trouble falling asleep, and when he finally did, the slightest noise was enough to wake him up. He would wake up sweating, with his heart racing, and worst of all, with the feeling that he hadn't even rested. Sleep deprivation was affecting everything in his life. After a few weeks of semen retention, his body began to enter a completely different rhythm. His nights became filled with deep, restorative sleep. He would lie down, close his eyes, and before he knew it, it was already morning. No more waking up in the middle of the night, no more disturbing dreams, and most importantly, no more anxiety that made him toss and turn in bed. Waking up feeling refreshed became his new routine. To further reinforce this process, he began to adopt some simple habits before going to bed. He turned off his cell phone at least an hour before going to bed, started reading physical books. One of his favorites during this phase was The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, and included calming teas, such as chamomile and fennel, in his nighttime routine. In addition, he started taking warm baths to relax his muscles. The combination of these habits and semen retention took his sleep to another level. And the results of this change were felt early in the morning. When he woke up, his body felt lighter, his mind more focused, and his energy seemed to overflow. Even his skin looked healthier, and the dark circles under his eyes, which had been deep, began to disappear. His coworkers started to comment, "You look like you slept for 10 hours straight, huh?" And he, inside, just thought, they don't know the secret. This new quality of sleep also had another incredible side effect. It made him develop self-control in the small decisions of his day, from choosing better what to eat to being more disciplined with his schedule. And this ability to self-control was just the beginning of the next transformation that was to come. Everything I'm explaining to you here, I explain more calmly in my ebook The Power of Semen Retention. It was made for those who are starting from scratch and want to know how to apply semen retention in their daily lives in a healthy way, without crazy things or exaggerations. It is a practical guide, straight to the point. 9. Self-control in other areas of life. After gaining control over his sexual energy through semen retention, he began to realize something that went far beyond what he had imagined. It was as if, by overcoming this strong impulse, a positive domino effect had been activated. His willpower, which had previously been as fragile as a house of cards, began to solidify like a wall. Deciding to say no to certain things that had previously dominated him became almost automatic. A clear example was with food. Before, all he had to do was see a fast food or a sweet treat and he would give in without thinking twice. Now, with the self-control generated by semen retention, he started to choose healthier foods without the mental suffering. He started to include more fruits, vegetables, and quality proteins in his diet. He avoided fried foods, cut down on processed foods, and even got into the habit of cooking at home. His body thanked him, and the physical results started to appear. But his self-control didn't stop there. He also started to cut out other addictions that seemed impossible to kick. He drastically reduced his time on social media, limited his TV series consumption, and even reduced his need for approval from others. Whereas before he would spend hours lost in random content, he now used that time to learn a new skill or read a good book. One that made a big difference was The Power of Your Subconscious Mind by Joseph Murphy. This transformation also had an impact on his work environment. He began to deliver projects faster and with better quality. He created a personal organization routine that involved weekly planning, daily goal reviews, and even the use of productivity apps like Todoist. With each small achievement, his sense of self-control only grew. He understood that if he could control his own sexual desire, controlling the rest was just a matter of choice and practice. And it was precisely during this phase of total internal control that he began to feel something even deeper. A kind of silent force that vibrated all the time within him. It was a difficult feeling to explain, but it made him feel capable of achieving anything. And this feeling is the subject of the next topic. 10. Continuous feeling of inner power. After all the changes that semen retention had brought, he began to feel something he had never experienced before. It wasn't just physical energy, or mental clarity, or emotional control. It was something deeper. A constant sense of inner power. That quiet certainty that no matter what happened, he had everything he needed to overcome. It was like charging an emotional battery to full capacity every day. This feeling was reflected in situations big and small. From an unexpected problem at work to a family argument, he reacted with poise and confidence. That old habit of despairing or looking for someone to solve things for him simply disappeared. Now, he faced challenges head-on. When life pushed him, he pushed back. No drama, no victimization. Just with an inner certainty that he was stronger than any obstacle. Even his posture began to convey this. His shoulders were open, his gaze firm, his steps determined. People around him began to notice and comment, "Man, you look different. You exude an absurd amount of confidence." And he would only respond with a discreet smile. Deep down, he knew that this strength came from the daily choice to maintain his own energy. Semen retention had become much more than a habit. It was now part of his identity. To maintain and further strengthen this feeling, he began to create daily rituals. In the morning, he would make positive affirmations while looking in the mirror. Simple things like, "I am strong, I am disciplined, I am in control of my life." At night, before going to sleep, he would review the day's victories. Small or large, they all counted. A book that further reinforced this mindset was Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. With each chapter, he found himself even more determined. And even with all this growth, he knew there was still more to come. Because the truth is that semen retention is not the destination. It is just the beginning of a much bigger journey. And now, with this inner power, he was ready to take the next step. But this is an invitation that I leave for you to reflect on.